I'm Sabine Ardmore, 51, and I spent 33 years in the Air Force earning a seat at the table, one quiet call at a time. From a scared enlisted kid in a cold intelligence shop to a general officer. For most of those years, I gave the work everything and let other people take the credit, because a chief once taught me that rank is what you do, not what you wear. But when I walked into my new command off an overnight flight, in travel clothes with my rank subdued, and a Marine major put his hand in my face and told me to get out before he made me, in front of the entire staff, I had a choice to make about the kind of leader I was going to be. Have you ever been dismissed, underestimated, or treated like nobody by someone who never once bothered to actually see you? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You are not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being wronged, hit that like button and subscribe. The coffee had gone cold before the sun came up, and I let it. It was a little after 0500, and the Director of Intelligence Office at the command was as quiet as a chapel. My office now. I still had trouble saying that, without a small pause in my chest, the way you pause before stepping onto ice, you are told, will hold you. The building was empty, except for the watch floor 2 levels down, and the only light in the room came from the lamp on my desk and the gray that was starting to climb the windows. On the corner of that desk sat a photograph in a plain black frame. A skinny girl of 19 in ill-fitting fatigues, and beside her, an older man with a chief's stripes and a face like weathered rope. The girl looked like she was bracing to be told she had done it wrong. The man looked like he already knew she would do it right eventually, and was willing to wait. People at this command think they know how my story here started. They think it started with a Marine major in a spotless uniform telling me to get out of a room before he made me. They tell it in the hallways, quieter now than they used to, and they always begin at the door. At the moment, the whole thing tipped over. But that is not where it starts. That is only where it became visible. The truth is that morning was decided 33 years earlier in a cold intelligence shop on a flightline base by the man in that photograph who taught a frightened teenager the only sentence that has ever really mattered to me. So let me take you back there first, because if you start at the door, you will think the story is about a man being humiliated. It is not. It is about what a person is worth before anyone in the room has decided to look. In 1993, I was 18 years old and certain of almost nothing. I had enlisted in the Air Force, the way some people jump into cold water, all at once, so I could not talk myself out of it. I wanted to matter, and I had no idea how, and the recruiter's office was warm, and the future felt like something that happened to other people. They made me an intelligence specialist, which sounded far grander than it was. Mostly it meant long shifts in a windowless room, learning to read the difference between what a thing looked like and what a thing was. My first supervisor was a master sergeant named Emerson Toft. He was old to me then, though he was younger than I am now, and he ran that shop the way a good farmer runs land, with no wasted motion and no patience for anyone who confused noise with work. I was scared of him for exactly 1 week. Then I understood him, and after that I would have run through a wall for him. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He had a way of setting a folder down on your desk without a word that told you everything about whether you had earned your pay that day. He gave the ugly shifts to the people who complained the least, and he gave the hardest problems to the people he thought could carry them, and being handed a hard problem by Chief Toft was the closest thing to praise the man offered. I chased that feeling for years without admitting I was chasing it. There was a night early on that I have never forgotten. We were working a time-sensitive picture, and a senior airman, 2 grades above me, a loud kid who liked the sound of his own certainty, called it one way. I had read it the other way, and I was right, and I knew I was right, and I said nothing because he outranked me, and the room was loud, and I was 18. Toft watched the whole thing. When the shift ended, he did not chew me out. He waited until the shop had emptied, and he pulled a chair around backward and sat on it and looked at me until I looked back. "You keep waiting for permission to be right," he said. His voice was flat and quiet, and it went straight through me. "Rank is what you do, kid, not what you wear. Nobody in this world is going to hand you the room. You earn it, one quiet call at a time, and half the time nobody claps. If you need the clapping, go do something else. If you can live without it, you might actually be good at this." I did not say anything. There was nothing to say. He got up, put the chair back, and told me to go home and sleep. But something had rearranged itself in me. Rank is what you do, not what you wear. I have carried that sentence for 33 years the way other people carry a cross or a wedding ring, as a thing you touch when you need to remember who you are. A few months after that night, Toph did the thing that changed the shape of my life, though it looked like nothing at the time. We got handed a problem that had stumped the day shift, a pattern in a stack of reporting that would not resolve into a clean picture no matter how you turned it. It was the kind of thing that gets kicked upstairs to someone with more rank and more experience, and everyone assumed it would be. Instead, Toft set the whole folder down on my desk, mine, a 19-year-old airman, and he said, "You saw it the other night when you kept your mouth shut. Let's find out if you can see it when it's yours to sign." Then he walked away and let me sweat. So I worked that problem for 2 shifts. I was terrified the entire time, certain I would embarrass him. And somewhere in the second night it opened up for me, the way a jammed lock finally turns, and I understood what the reporting was actually saying. I brought it to him shaking. He read it, grunted, made 2 small corrections, and sent it forward with my name on it. Nobody clapped, nobody ever does. But I had carried a hard thing, and I had discovered I could, and that discovery is the only real education there is. He gave me that on purpose. It took me 20 years to understand that handing a scared kid a problem she thinks is too big for her is one of the most generous things a leader can do. He was not soft with me. I want to be clear about that because people hear the word mentor and they picture warmth. Toft was not warm. He was fair, which is rarer and worth more. He corrected me in front of no one and expected everything from me in private. When I got it wrong, he told me exactly how and why, without cruelty and without cushioning, and then he expected me to fix it and move on. When I got it right, he said almost nothing, which I learned to read as the highest praise the man had in him. He taught me that the work was a form of respect you paid to the people downstream of you, the ones who would live or die by whether your assessment was correct, and that they would never know your name, and that this was exactly as it should be. Do it right because it is right, he said, not because anyone is watching, especially when no one is watching. That is the whole job, so I did the work. That is the whole unglamorous secret of everything that came after. I took the night shifts nobody wanted. I wrote the assessment that was correct instead of the one that was popular, and I watched other people carry my calls into bright rooms and take the credit, and I let them, because Toft had told me the work was the point, and I believed him. I built a reputation in the places where the real work happens, in the vaults and the watch floors and the debrief rooms, among the people who actually know who did what. And I stayed completely invisible to the kind of people who only ever count the stars on a collar and decide from there how loudly to speak to you. For most of my life, those 2 facts sat side by side without ever colliding. It took a delayed flight and a locked door to finally introduce them. The years went by faster than years have any right to. I was commissioned in 2000, a second lieutenant at 25, older than most of the butter bars around me and quieter than all of them. I deployed twice to places I still do not talk about at dinner, and in those places, the lesson stopped being a saying and became a way of staying alive. In a fight, the person who is right matters far more than the person who is loud, and the cost of confusing the two is measured in people who do not come home. I learned to make the quiet, correct call in a room full of confident men and to hold it when they pushed, not because I enjoyed being contrary, but because a chief had spent years teaching a teenager that the work is a debt you owe the people downstream. I took a squadron in 2012, and I ran it the way I had been raised in that cold shop. There was a young sergeant in that unit, sharp as anything, who had been overlooked for 2 straight boards because she did not campaign for herself, did not stand in the right hallways, did not have the knack for being seen. Her work was better than half the people who had been promoted ahead of her, and I knew it because I read the actual product instead of the reputations. I handed her the hardest account in the squadron, the one everyone said was a career risk, and I let her carry it, and I made sure the board that year saw exactly what she had done. She pinned on the next cycle. Years later, she wrote to tell me she had made Master Sergeant and that she now did the same thing for her own people, found the quiet ones who were right, and handed them the room. That letter meant more to me than my star. It was Toft's lesson, still moving, still doing its work 2 generations downstream from a cold shop in 1993. I made Colonel in 2018. In 2024, they pinned a star on me, and I stood there at the ceremony thinking about a cold shop in 1993 and a man with a face like rope. And I looked for him in the crowd, even though I knew he was 3 states away on a porch, probably telling someone he was not surprised. And then, this year, at 51, they gave me the command's Intelligence Directorate, Director of Intelligence at a Unified Combatant Command. It is the kind of job you do not so much accept as inherit, with all the weight that word carries. Before I flew out to report in, I spent an evening on the phone with the officer who would be my executive officer, a sharp young captain named Imani Ostrander. She had been at the headquarters a few months, and she gave me the honest brief, the one you do not get in the welcome packet. "Ma'am, fair warning," she said. "This place is good. The people are smart, but it can be cold until it decides you belong. There's a whole culture here around who looks important. If your name is already on somebody's list, doors open. If it isn't, some of these gatekeepers can be a little in love with the rope line, just so you're not surprised." I told her I did not surprise easily anymore. I was wrong about that, though not in the way I expected. She was describing a building. She could not have known she was also describing two specific men. The headquarters ran its most sensitive spaces through a small shop under the headquarters commandant, and the man at the point of that spear was a Marine major named Bart Renwick. He was 39, sharp-creased, ambitious in the way that curdles when it is not fed fast enough. He had decided somewhere along the line that controlling access to important rooms made him important by association, and he guarded those doors like a man guarding his own worth, because in a sense, he was. His boss was a lieutenant colonel named Oberon Vesely, the headquarters commandant, a man who had learned that a zealous subordinate is convenient and had stopped asking whether the zeal cost anyone anything. "Nobody gets past you they shouldn't," Vesely told him once, the kind of line a leader says to a hard charger without thinking about the second half of it. "Nobody does, sir," Renwick said, and he meant it as a promise. Neither of them ever considered that a door built to keep the wrong people out is also very good at keeping the right people standing in the hallway if the man at the door has decided in advance what right people look like. I have thought a great deal since about how a man becomes a Renwick. He was not born cruel. Almost no one is. Somewhere along the way, he had learned that his value came from the door, from being the person who decided, and once a man's sense of his own worth is wired to a thing like that, he will defend it the way he would defend his own life. Because to him, it is the same thing. He had probably been praised for exactly the behavior that humiliated me. Sharp, squared away, doesn't let anyone slip past. Every one of those compliments had quietly filed off a little more of his ability to see the person in front of him until all he could see was a category. Contractor, visitor, belongs, does not belong. He had made himself into a very efficient sorting machine, and machines do not ask whether the thing they are sorting has a name, or 33 years in a uniform, or a seat waiting at the head of the table. That is not an excuse for him. It is just the truth of how the corridor got built, one compliment and one unchecked assumption at a time. And it is worth understanding, because the same machinery lives in a lot of good buildings and a lot of good people. And it is always one tired morning away from doing real harm. The flight is worth telling you about, because the smallest things decide the largest ones. My connection went bad in stages. First a mechanical, then a crew timing issue, then a gate change, each delay small and reasonable on its own, and together they ate the whole night. I sat in a plastic chair in a nearly empty terminal at 2 a.m. doing the math. And the math was ugly. Land at 0,500. Brief at 0,600. No time to reach quarters, no time to change, no time for my aide to link up and walk me in. I remember making the decision to just go straight in, travel clothes and all, and I remember thinking, with the easy confidence of someone who has been known in every room for years, that it would be fine, because the work is the point and the clothes are not. I even smiled a little at the thought. Toft would have liked it. Rank is what you do, not what you wear. And here I was, about to prove it by walking into the most important room in a new command, looking like exactly nobody. I had no idea I was about to prove it in a way I had not chosen. In a hallway, in front of everyone. I did not know either of them yet. I was, at that moment, in an airport 1,100 miles away, watching a departure board flip my connection from on time to delayed, and then delayed again. By the time I understood the shape of the night, it was too late to fix. I would land at 0500 and go straight to a classified pre-brief that started at 0600 sharp, with no time to check into quarters, no time to change, and no aide on the ground to walk me in. I would arrive in travel-worn utilities with my rank subdued and dark on my chest, a garment bag over my shoulder, looking like exactly nobody. I remember thinking, half asleep against the cold window of the plane, that it did not matter. The work was the point. I would walk in, take my seat, and do the job. I have replayed that thought many times since. It did not matter what I looked like. I believed that with my whole heart, because a chief taught it to me on a night I was too young to understand it. What I had forgotten, in the comfortable years of people already knowing my name before I entered a room, was that not everyone had gotten the lesson. Some men read the uniform and stopped reading there. And one of them was standing at a door at 05:50 in the morning, waiting for someone who looked like she did not belong, so he could show a room full of people how well he did his job. The corridor outside the command briefing room was bright and cold and smelled like floor wax and burnt coffee. I came off the elevator with my garment bag on one shoulder and my eyes gritty from a night that had never quite become sleep. There was a sign-in desk near the door, and behind it a young airman, a senior airman by his stripes, barely old enough to buy a beer. His name tape said Preto. He looked up when I approached, and to his credit, he did not look through me the way tired young troops sometimes do at that hour. He straightened a little. "Morning, ma'am," he said. "Are you here for the 0600? I told him I was, and I gave him my name, and I watched him run his finger down a printed list. I saw the exact moment he found it, saw his eyebrows go up a fraction, and I saw him open his mouth to say something. He never got the chance. The major came out of nowhere, the way men do when they have been waiting for a reason. He was immaculate. Every crease could have cut paper, and he moved with the brisk certainty of a person who has decided the morning belongs to him. He took one look at me, the garment bag, the travel clothes, the dark, quiet rank he did not bother to actually read, and I watched a conclusion form on his face before I had said a single word. "This is a closed brief," he said, loud enough for the room filling up behind him to hear. "Contractors and visitors check in at Building 2. "You are in the wrong place, ma'am." I told him calmly that I was expected, that my name was on the list, that the young airman had just found it. I did not reach for my rank. I did not announce myself. I want you to understand that this was not a trap I was springing. It simply did not occur to me that I would have to. In every room that had mattered for a decade, people knew who I was before I opened the door. I had forgotten how it felt to have to prove I was allowed to breathe the air. Preto tried. "God bless that kid," he tried. "Sir," he said, "her name is right here on the principals." Renwick did not even look at him. "Stand down, airman," he said, and Preto's mouth closed. Then the major stepped fully into my path, close, and he raised one hand between us, palm out, the universal gesture of a man who has decided you are a problem to be managed. "I am not going to say it again," he said. "Get out before I make you. This room is for people who matter. There are moments that go very slow and very clear, and that was one of them. I could feel the whole corridor watching. I could feel the heat climb my neck, that old animal reaction to being cornered in public. And underneath it, strange and steady, I could hear a chief's voice from 1993 telling me that nobody hands you the room and that I did not need the clapping. I had stood in rooms this man would never be cleared to know existed. I had made calls that moved people who could end him with a phone call. And I said nothing, because the loudest thing I owned that morning was my silence. And I have learned that silence held right is not weakness. It is a door you leave open for the truth to walk through on its own. It was into that silence that the lieutenant colonel arrived. Vesley, the commandant, drawn by the noise the way senior men are always drawn by noise their people are making. I thought for one foolish second that a more senior officer would look at the situation and check it. That is what senior officers are for. Instead, he took in the scene, the pristine major and the rumpled woman with a garment bag, and he made the same lazy read Renwick had made, and he chose the easy side. "Ma'am," he said, not unkindly, which was somehow worse, "if you are not on the access roster, you will need to wait in the hall. My major is just doing his job." There was a small, satisfied nod between the two of them, teacher and student, a job well done. So I stepped back. I did not argue. I set my garment bag down against the wall, and I stood there in the hallway. A 51-year-old general officer with 33 years in the uniform, told to wait outside a room I had flown all night to sit at the head of. Preto looked like he wanted to sink into the floor on my behalf. And for about 10 seconds, the two men who had put me there enjoyed being right. Then the far door of the corridor opened, the one that led from the command suite, and the room changed the way a room changes when weather comes in. A general walked through it. 4 stars. General Hollis Brenner, the combatant commander, a Marine with a face like a closed fist and eyes that missed nothing in a building he had run for 2 years. Everyone in that corridor came to attention out of pure reflex. Rennick snapped up straightest of all, chin high, the very picture of the squared-away officer, ready to be seen doing his duty. Brenner did not look at him. Brenner looked at me, standing against the wall next to my garment bag, and something in his hard face eased, just slightly, the way it does when you see a colleague you respect in an unexpected place. He crossed the corridor toward me, and the whole room turned to see who he was walking to, and he stopped in front of me and gave me a small nod. "Morning, General," he said. 2 words. That is all it was. "Morning, General." He said it the way you greet an equal, easy and warm and completely certain, and those 2 words went off in that corridor like a pressure wave. I felt the temperature of the room invert in a single second. I heard, behind Brenner, a sound I will remember for the rest of my life. The small, strangled catch of a man's breath as his entire understanding of the last 3 minutes collapsed. Renwick had gone the color of ash. His raised hand, the one that had been in my face, was still half lifted at his side, and now it did not know where to go. I looked at Brenner and I returned it, because that is what you do, and because there was nothing in me that needed to do anything more. "Morning, sir," I said, and the word general hung over that corridor like a verdict that had already been read, over a major whose mouth was open and whose face had drained white, and over a lieutenant colonel who had just realized, a half-second too late, exactly which side of a very simple question he had chosen to stand on. Brenner turned to the room then, and his voice filled the corridor without rising. "Good," he said. "You have all met her. This is Brigadier General Sabine Ardmore, our new Director of Intelligence. She will be sitting at the head of the table you are all filing into." He let that land for exactly 1 beat, his eyes sweeping the frozen faces, and then he said, mildly, "Shall we?" And he held the door. I picked up my garment bag. I walked past Major Renwick, who could not meet my eyes, and past Lieutenant Colonel Vesely, whose face had gone very still and very old. And I walked into the briefing room and took the seat at the head of the principal's table, the seat that had been waiting for me the entire time I stood in the hall. Preto scrambled to pull the chair, and I thanked him by name, quietly, and he flushed with something that was not embarrassment. The brief began, and here is the part people who tell the story in the hallway always skip because it does not fit the shape they want. I did not enjoy it. I want to be honest with you about that. There is a version of me, a younger version, who would have savored the next hour, would have watched Renwick sweat through his uniform as he stood to brief a slide to a room that now included the woman he had thrown into the hall. That younger woman would have made a small remark, sharp and clean, and let the room laugh and called it justice. But I am not 18 anymore, and I am not 35, and I have learned that the sweetest feeling thing in a moment is very rarely the right thing over a year. So I listened to the brief. I asked good questions. When Renwick stood to present his portion, his hands were not steady, and his voice cracked once on a slide, and I did not look at him any harder than I looked at anyone else. I gave him the same flat, attentive courtesy I gave the colonel beside him. That courtesy, I could see, cost him more than any barb would have. He kept waiting for the blade. I never drew it. The brief itself was serious work, and I gave it my full attention, because that is also who I am, and because the mission does not pause so that anyone can nurse their feelings. It was a regional assessment with real stakes, the kind of picture where the difference between what a thing looks like and what a thing is can move ships and people. There was a point where the current reading on one line of the analysis did not sit right with me, a place where the confidence being expressed was larger than the evidence underneath it, and I said so, plainly, the way Toff taught me. I asked the room what we actually knew versus what we were assuming we knew, and I watched the good analysts in the seats sit up, because that is the question that separates real intelligence work from expensive guessing. It was not about proving I belonged at the head of the table. I had stopped needing to prove that at the door, the moment a 4-star said my rank into a hallway. It was simply the job, done the only way I know how to do it. Renwick, standing at the screen with his slide, saw a general who was not interested in his humiliation at all, only in whether the assessment was right, and I think that unsettled him more than any punishment could have, because it told him the thing he had done to me had never been about a contest he could win or lose. It had just been wrong. By the end of the hour, he looked like a man who had been holding his breath for 60 minutes. Afterward, in the corridor, Imani Ostrander finally caught up with me. She had landed on a later flight and missed the whole thing. And she heard about it in the way you hear about a car accident, in fragments from horrified witnesses. And by the time she found me, her face was a thundercloud. "Ma'am," she said, low and furious, keeping her voice down only because we were in a public hall. "Say the word. I mean it. What he did, in front of the whole staff, to a flag officer. Say the word, and I will have him standing tall in front of the commandant by lunch. I will have him counseled, flagged, moved. Just say it." I understood her anger. I loved her a little for it, honestly, the way you love someone who is angry on your behalf before you have even asked. But I had already, somewhere in that hour of listening to a nervous major brief a slide, made a decision. "The word isn't the point, Imani," I told her. "I know it feels like it is. Believe me, part of me wants to say it as much as you want to hear it. But think about what the word does, not to him, to the 100 other airmen and soldiers and sailors in this building who are going to watch what I do next. If the story they learn is that you can treat someone like nothing, and the only thing that saves them is a star on their collar, then I have taught them that rank is a shield for the important and a boot for everyone else." That is the exact thing that happened to me at that door. I am not going to turn around and do it back. She did not like it. She was young, and it did not feel like justice to her. It felt like letting him get away with it. I told her to trust me and to wait, and I went to find a quiet office, and I called the one person in the world who would understand exactly what I was carrying. Chief Toft answered on the 4th ring, the way he always does, like the phone is an imposition he tolerates for a select few. I told him the whole thing, the delayed flight, the garment bag, the major's hand in my face, the words "get out before I make you," the lieutenant colonel taking the easy side, the 4-star coming through the door. When I got to morning general, the old man laughed, a dry bark of a laugh I had not heard in years, and it undid something tight in my chest. "2 words, he said, still chuckling. "That poor fool." He heard a career change in 2 words. He was quiet for a moment, and then his voice went to the register I knew best, the flat, serious one from the shop floor. "But listen to me, because I know you. You are sitting there wanting to make it even. Don't. You already won. You won the second that general said your rank into that hallway. Everything you do from here, you are spending that win on something. Don't spend it getting even. Spend it getting it right." I sat with the phone against my ear and the gray light coming up outside a strange office, and I thought about what getting it right would cost, and what getting even would cost, and which one I would still respect in a year. Relieving Renwick would feel like fire for about an hour, and it would teach the building the wrong lesson. It would teach them to fear the collar, not to respect the person. I wanted to teach a better lesson than the one that had been aimed at me in that corridor. I just was not yet sure I had the discipline to do it. The realization traveled through the headquarters faster than I did. That is how buildings work. By the time the in-processing paperwork reached the commandant's shop, my name at the top of it, the story of the corridor had already gone everywhere twice. I have been told what it looked like when Vesely put the 2 facts together, the woman his major had thrown into the hall, and the name on the memo appointing the new director of intelligence. I have been told, he sat down, that the color went out of him the way it goes out of a man who has just felt the floor of his career tilt under his feet. Because he understood, before Renwick did, exactly what it meant. The directorate I now ran touched everything the intelligence and operations side of that command did. For a great deal of what mattered in that building, the woman told to wait. In the hallway was now the senior officer in their chain, the name at the top of the endorsement on their evaluations, the person whose good opinion their futures quietly depended on. Renwick understood it about an hour later when Vesely told him. I did not see his face, but I did not need to. I have seen that particular understanding land on enough people to know its shape. It is not fear, exactly. It is a kind of vertigo, the sensation of having stepped off a curb you did not know was there. I let them sit with it for 2 days, not as a cruelty. I needed the time to be sure of my own temper, to make certain that when I brought them in, I would be acting from principle, and not from the small, hot part of me that wanted them to squirm. On the 3rd day, I had them both come to my office. I want you to picture it, because it is not what they expected, and it is not what my captain wanted. They came in, braced. Renwick stood like a man in front of a firing squad, and Vesely had the careful, folded expression of a leader trying to get ahead of a disaster. They expected me to be big, to raise my voice, to enumerate their failures, to enjoy it. I did none of that. I asked them to sit. I told them, plainly and without heat, what had happened in that corridor from my side of it. What it is like to be told to get out of a room you have every right to enter. What it is like to have a man raise his hand in your face and inform you that the room is for people who matter. I did not perform it. I just told it true, and I let them feel the actual size of the thing they had done, which is always larger than the version people carry when they think they got away with it. I told them about the hallway. Not with heat, just with the plain facts of it. I told them what it is to set your bag down against a wall and stand there while a room full of your new colleagues decides you are furniture. I told them that I had spent 33 years earning the right to walk through that door, and that neither of them had asked me a single question before deciding I had not. I looked at Vesely, and I told him that his job, the actual job, was not to protect his major from consequences, but to protect the command from exactly the kind of morning they had just handed me. And that when he arrived and saw a woman being turned away, he had a choice. And he chose the lazy read because it was easier than the correct one. I did not shout any of it. I have learned that the truth said quietly, across a desk with the door closed, lands harder than the truth shouted. They had nowhere to look. There was no room to be defensive in because I was not attacking. I was just describing, accurately, the thing they had done and letting them sit inside it the way they had made me sit in that hall. And then I told them the part that mattered. You did not fail because you did not know my rank, I said. Get that idea out of your heads right now, because it is the easy version and it lets you off the hook. If the lesson you walk out of here with is check the collar next time, then I have wasted both our mornings. You did not fail because you missed a star. You failed because you decided that a person without an obvious rank did not matter. You looked at someone who could not immediately prove her importance to you, and you decided she could be treated like nothing. That is the failure. That is the thing we are going to fix, and we are going to fix it whether or not there is ever a general standing in the hallway to catch you. Renwick started to apologize, and I stopped him gently. Not yet, I said. Apologies are cheap this morning. I will believe you when I see how you treat the next person who walks up to your desk looking like they do not belong. I did not relieve him. I want to be clear about that because it is the part people find hardest to believe. I did not end his career. What I did was change the rules of the building. I directed that week a command-wide standard. Access to every controlled space would be verified by roster and by identity, by who a person actually was, and never, ever, by who a person looked important enough to be. Every gatekeeper in that headquarters would be held accountable not just for who they let in, but for how they treated the people they turned away. Dignity became part of the standard in writing with my name on it. And Vesely, who had built the culture that made the corridor possible, who had taken the easy side when he could have checked his major, carried the heavier institutional weight for it. Quietly and without spectacle, in the places where a leader's failures are actually recorded. There was pressure to do more and pressure to do less. Some on the staff wanted a public burning, they wanted Renwick marched out, wanted the story to end with a body, because that is the ending that feels like justice and makes a good tale in the bar. When it became clear I was not going to give them that, a rumor mill turned for a week, the way it does, some of it whispering that I had gone soft, that a real leader would have made an example. I held firm. I was not interested in an example. An example is a thing you make for an afternoon. I was interested in a building that behaved differently on an ordinary Tuesday, months later, when no general was anywhere near the door and no one was watching, and it would have been easy to go back to the old way. That is the only kind of change that is real. The rest is theater. I took some heat for it, quietly, in the way senior officers take heat, which is to say that no one says it to your face, but you can feel it in the room. There were people who had wanted the spectacle and did not get it, and a few of them decided that meant I was weak, that I lacked the spine to do the hard thing. It is a strange irony because sparing him was the hard thing. Firing him would have been easy. Firing him would have taken a signature and an afternoon, and it would have felt wonderful, and it would have taught the building nothing, except that the powerful protect themselves and the rest of you had better hope a general is watching when someone wrongs you. I had lived on the wrong end of that lesson in a hallway. I was not going to teach it from the head of a table, so I let them think what they wanted about my spine. I have carried harder things than the disappointment of people who confuse cruelty with strength. Toff taught me that too, though he never said it in so many words. He just lived it, Decade after decade, doing the right quiet thing while the loud men got the credit and never once seeming to mind. I minded, for years. I am only now learning not to. The pressure the other direction was real as well. Renwick had a few defenders, people who thought the whole thing was overblown, that he had simply done his job and gotten unlucky, that a tired general with a garment bag really could not expect to be recognized. I understood the argument. I even had some sympathy for the honest version of it. But it missed the entire point, and I said so, more than once, to more than one colonel who came by my office to test the temperature. The failure was never that he did not recognize me, I told them. The failure was that he decided a person he could not place was a person who did not matter. Fix your eyes on that sentence, I said, because it is the whole thing, and it has nothing to do with stars. The consequences came, but not the way the rumor mill wanted them. They came slowly, and they came as reckoning rather than as a firing, which is a harder thing to watch and a truer thing to live. Besley felt it first. Enabling a culture is a quieter sin than committing the act, and it draws a quieter punishment, but the punishment is real. There was a hard counseling session that I did not have to be in the room for. There was an opportunity, a command screening he had been quietly counting on, that did not come his way that cycle, and he was senior enough to understand precisely why, without anyone having to tell him. And there was the slow, private education of a man realizing that looking the other way had not been neutral. That every time he had said nobody gets past you, they shouldn't, and left off the rest of the sentence, he had been building the exact corridor that a general got left standing in. He did not become a villain in this story. He became something more useful and more human. He became a leader who finally understood the cost of the thing he had let slide. Renwick's world cracked too, but not because I broke it. I never touched it. It cracked because the standard I set would no longer let him hide behind his own zeal. The thing that had made him feel important, the power to decide who mattered at a door, was simply gone, replaced by a procedure that did not care how impressive anyone found him. He had to do the job the new way now. He had to verify a nervous contractor's badge and a jet-lagged colonel's orders with the same patient, baseline respect, and treat the person who looked like nobody exactly as carefully as the person who looked like somebody. And that, it turned out, was far harder than being feared. Being feared is easy. It requires nothing of your character. Treating everyone as if they might matter when you get no applause for it and no one is checking requires the very thing he had never been asked to grow. I watched from a distance. I did not summon him for progress reports. I did not soften toward him in the hallways or harden either. I did not check on him. I simply did my job, well and visibly, and I let him sit inside the space his own words had carved out around him. I think that was the part that reached him in the end, more than any punishment could have. He kept waiting for me to bring the hammer down, and the hammer never came. And slowly he understood that it was not coming, that the absence of the blow was the whole point, and that the person he had told to get out was never going to spend one more minute of her life making him pay. That is a strange, heavy thing to carry. It is much easier to be punished than to be spared and expected to be better. I heard about the small moments secondhand, the way you always do. There was a defense contractor who came through the checkpoint that Renwick ran, an older woman, jet-lagged and flustered, whose paperwork was not quite in order, and by every account the old Renwick would have made a performance of turning her away, would have enjoyed the small power of it in front of whoever was watching. Instead, he slowed down. He walked her through what she needed, verified what he could, treated her like a person who had somewhere to be and a reason to be there, and got her squared away without a single witness to reward him for it. A staff sergeant who saw it told my aide about it because it was so unlike the man they thought they knew. That is the thing I had been after. Not a public apology. A private, unwatched, unrewarded decency, repeated until it becomes character. You cannot order that into existence. You can only build a standard that makes the old way impossible, and then step back and let a person decide whether they will rise to it. He was, slowly, rising to it. And I made a point of never letting him see that I had noticed, because a man doing the right thing for applause has not actually changed at all. He avoided me for weeks. He dreaded the first evaluation cycle, I know, because I hold the higher endorsement on his rating chain, and he had every reason to believe I would use it to end him. He came to my office one afternoon and asked for 2 minutes, and I gave them to him. He stood there, and for once there was no crease in him that could cut paper, just a man, and he apologized. Not the save my career apology I had braced for, a real one. He named exactly what he had done. He said the words, "Get out before I make you back to me," out loud in his own mouth, and I watched him hear how they sounded. He said he had looked at me and decided in advance what I was worth, and that he had been wrong and that he was ashamed. He did not ask me to forgive him. That is how I knew it was real. I did not tell him all was forgiven, because it was not mine to hand him like a gift, and because instant forgiveness would have cheapened the very thing he was finally taking seriously. I told him something truer. "I don't need you to be sorry to me, Major," I said. "I outrank you. Being sorry to me is easy, and it is worth almost nothing. What I need is for you to be different to the next person who walks up to your desk looking like nobody. The one who cannot prove they matter, who has no star to save them, no general coming through a door. Be different to that person, on a day when no one will ever know you did it. Do that, and we are square. Keep doing it, and you will have become the kind of officer I would have wanted at that door in the first place." He nodded. He could not quite speak. And he went back to his desk, and from everything I have seen since, he did the work. There was one more thing I did, and it is the part I am proudest of. Senior Airman Devin Preto, the young man at the sign-in desk who had tried to vouch for me while a major talked over him, who had stood his small ground for a stranger and gotten shut down for it. I made sure that did not go unseen. He had done the right thing in the one moment it was expensive to do it, when the person he was defending looked like nobody, and the person overruling him wore a spotless uniform and had all the authority in the room. That is the rarest kind of courage, the kind that gets you nothing. I made sure it got him something. A coin pressed into his hand with a quiet word only he heard. A good report to his leadership. And a door opened that he had never dared to knock on. A development opportunity, a school he thought was for other people. A note in the right ear that a general had her eye on this one. I did not do it loudly. I did it the way Toft had done things for me decades ago, when he handed a scared teenager a hard problem and let her discover she could carry it. I called Preto into my office a few weeks after all of it, and I watched him come through the door, braced the way young troops brace when a general wants to see them, certain he had done something wrong. I sat him down and I told him the truth. I told him that on the worst morning of my first week, when a major twice his rank was talking over him, and a lieutenant colonel was telling him to stand down, he had looked at a stranger who could not prove she was anybody, and he had tried to do right by her anyway. I told him that this was the rarest kind of courage there is, the kind that gets you nothing, that risks something for a person who cannot pay you back, on a day when the safe move was to look at your shoes. I told him I had seen it, and that I would not forget it, and that I expected him to keep being exactly that person for the next 50 years. Then I handed him the coin, and I told him about the school. The development slot he had never once imagined was for someone like him, and I watched a young man realize that a door he thought was locked had been open the whole time. He went to that school. He did well. Last I heard, he was leading a small team of his own, and I would put money on the fact that somewhere in it there is a quiet kid who is right more often than anyone notices, and that Senior Airman Preto, now a staff sergeant, is handing that kid a hard problem and letting them find out what they can carry. That is how it moves. That is the only way it has ever moved. The building changed, 1 degree at a time, which is the only way buildings actually change. People who looked like nobody got verified and got respected, and after a while, nobody remembered to be impressed that it was happening, and that was exactly the point. The velvet rope was gone. Not because a general had demanded it in a fit of wounded pride, but because the culture had shifted, quietly, in the direction of treating a person's worth as something you assume rather than something you make them prove. The months went by. I want to tell you the truth about how it settled, because the truth is quieter and better than the ending the rumor mill wanted. Renwick did not become a redeemed hero, riding off transformed. And he did not become a cautionary corpse either, marched out for the entertainment of the staff. He became something more real than either. He became a man doing a job correctly and living, every single day, with a morning he could not take back. His future stayed open. He earned that. I gave him the chance to earn it, and he took it. And that is a better story than a firing, because it is a true one, and because a person who changes is worth infinitely more to the world than a person who is simply removed. I called Toft again near the end of it and told him how it had all landed. The standard in writing, Vesely's quiet reckoning, Renwick doing the work, Prieto moving up. The old chief was silent for a long moment on the line, and when he spoke, his voice was rough in a way that had nothing to do with his age. "You did the thing," he said, "that I could never get the loud ones to do. You let being right be enough. You didn't need the room to clap." He paused. "I always knew you had it. I'm glad you finally believe me. I sat with that for a while after we hung up. Believe me is a strange phrase from a man who spent decades teaching me not to need anyone's belief. And I understood, sitting there, that he did not mean believe him about my own worth. He meant believe him that being right could be enough. That was always the harder lesson, the one I had resisted for 33 years, without quite admitting it, because some stubborn part of me had gone on wanting the room to clap, even after I had learned to work without it. The corridor had offered me the loudest applause of my career, handed to me on a plate. All I had to do was crush a man in front of everyone, and the whole building would have cheered, would have called it justice, would have told the story for years. And I had turned it down. Not because I was a saint. I am not. But because a chief on a porch 3 states away had taught a frightened teenager that the work is the point and the applause is a trap. And because I finally, at 51, believed him all the way down. Because there was a question underneath the whole thing that I had been circling for months, and I want to be honest and lay it in front of you because I do not think I am the only one who has ever had to ask it. I could have made that morning about my own humiliation. I had every right to. A man put his hand in my face and told a room I did not matter, and I could have spent the enormous power I suddenly held making sure he learned exactly how much I did. Instead, I chose to make it about everyone who has ever been treated like nobody at a door they had every right to walk through. And in the quiet hours, I kept asking myself which it really was. Was that strength? Or was it just a slower, more comfortable kind of pride? A way of feeling superior by refusing to stoop? I genuinely did not know. Some nights I still am not certain, but I knew which version of myself I could stand to be in a year, and I knew which one Chief Toft would recognize. And in the end, I decided that letting it go, when I so easily could have crushed it, might have been the bravest thing I have ever done in a uniform. Which brings me back to where I started. A little after 0500, the coffee gone cold, the office quiet as a chapel, the photograph on the corner of the desk. I know now that the girl in it is me at 19, and the man beside her is the chief who told a frightened kid that rank is what you do, not what you wear, and then spent years making her believe it. That morning I have been telling you about, the one the whole building still whispers over, was a good morning in the end. Not because I won, because of what I chose to do with the winning. That weekend I drove out to see him. Civilian clothes, no rank anywhere on me, just an old car and a long stretch of highway and a bag of the terrible black licorice he pretends not to like. He was on his porch, 71 years old and still built like weathered rope, and he watched me come up the walk with a look I have been chasing since 1993. The one that says he already knew I would turn out fine and was willing to wait for the rest of the world to catch up. We sat. He teased me about the star, said they must be handing them out to anybody these days. I told him it still fit the way he had taught me to wear it. He looked out at his yard for a while, and then he said it, the way he has said it 100 times, quiet and flat and true. Rank is what you do. Not what you wear, I finished. I heard you the first time, Chief. Took me 33 years, but I heard you. He smiled at that. We did not talk about the corridor much. He did not need the details, and I did not need to relive them. Mostly we talked about small things, his garden, a fishing spot he still swore by, an airman we had both known who had turned out well. But before I left, he walked me to my car and he put a hand on my shoulder, which for Toft was practically an embrace. And he said one more thing. You spared him, he said. Most people, the second they can, they hit back. You didn't. That is the whole ballgame, kid. That is the thing I was trying to teach you in that shop, and it took you 33 years, but you got there. I did not trust my voice to answer him, so I just nodded, and he nodded back, satisfied, and let me go. We sat on the porch until the light went long, 2 people who had done the work when nobody was clapping, and it was enough. It was more than enough. Back at the command on an ordinary morning I was not even there to see. A young lieutenant came off a red-eye in travel clothes with a bag over her shoulder and her rank subdued and quiet, looking like exactly nobody, and she walked up to the access desk outside a controlled space. And the person at that desk checked her name against the roster and found it and said, "Welcome aboard, ma'am. Right this way," and treated her like she mattered before anyone had decided whether she did. No one made her prove it. No one told her to get out. She will never know that a corridor once taught this building a lesson, or that a general spent a win she was owed on making sure that door would never again ask a person to earn the right to be seen. She will just walk through it, into the room she came for, and do the work. Which is the whole point. That is what all of it was for. So if someone ever tells you to get out of a room, you have every right to stand in. If a person looks at you and decides, before you have said a word, that you do not matter, I want you to remember something. You do not have to raise your voice. You do not have to prove anything to the person who has already refused to see you. Just stand there, do the work. Carry yourself like the truth is on its way, because it is. Let it walk in on its own 2 feet, in its own time. And when it does, you will not have to say a single word. The truth always knows your name. It always has. It was only ever the room that needed to learn it. If you've ever walked into a room where someone decided, before you said a single word, that you didn't belong there, then you already know exactly how that hallway felt. I would love to hear from you. Would you have relieved the major on the spot, or would you have done what I did and spent the win on the building instead of on the man? Have you ever had a chief toft in your life, someone who taught you a lesson you didn't fully understand until decades later? And have you ever been the one at the desk, the person who got to decide whether a stranger mattered? Tell me in the comments. I read them, all of them. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and stay a while.